Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar event, Developing Your Talent Strategy with Prosperix Exponential. My name is Brian Pena. I am the CEO and founder of Define Solutions, as well as Define Events and Education. And I am absolutely so excited about today's content and event. I'm going to do my best to get through my housekeeping. And before I bring up our main event, which is Sunil Vijay, the founder and CEO of Prosperix. I've known Sunil for some time, and I'm going to do a little bit more, but I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully those of you in the phone, enjoyed our speed networking session. We had a number of people on the phone. I was able to make a number of great connections, and I hope you did as well. Now we're going to want some basic housekeeping, where I explain some of the ins and outs of the AirMeet platform, which is a little bit of a differentiated experience, and we're going to go. So without further ado, I want to always recognize the fact that one of the things that I'm proud of at Define Solutions is our ability to put together a global audience. This is just a representation of all the countries we have on the phone today. Everybody from Argentina and Bangladesh down to UAE, Turkey, Singapore, and Pakistan. I'm very, very proud of that. I think it's an amazing function of what we do here to be able to deploy and implement these solutions across the globe and carry your message, the Defiant message, the future of work message, all over the world. Who is Defiant? We are a events-based business, more of a media channel, dedicated to the future of work, where we work with providers of all shapes and sizes to amplify their message in an omni-channel manner. Defiant Solutions is our consulting practice, where we work with town platforms and enterprises, as well as staffing firms and HR tech providers on developing next-generation go-to-market strategies. The AirMeet control panel is obviously a little bit different. You've probably ever seen it before. So on the upper right-hand side, you'll see the icon for other attendees. You can feel to send us direct messages, announcements, and alerts. If you want to share your thoughts with other attendees, you can use that chat button and all of your things. I see Rebecca went ahead and put out her Talent Cheetah logo out there. If you want to answer us questions, we'll do our best to address all the questions throughout the session. Please feel free to enter those in the Q&A section. And be aware that you have the opportunity to be called on stage. This is also a function of what we do here. If you ask a question that's relatively relevant, we'll call you on stage. You can ask it live and interact with it one-on-one. We're going to have polls. And then, of course, if you get tired of seeing that upper right-hand corner, you press the downward arrow and it'll go ahead and hide it. We do have the ability, if you kind of don't want to see the screen in smaller form, there's an expansion view in the upper right-hand corner. You click on that button and it'll expand the slides to cover the full screen. Also, one of the things that we mentioned is we do have our roundtable sessions afterward. This is where after the session ends, we'll stay around as long as there are people along who want to hang out and chat with us, and we'll talk about whatever topics are of interest with you, with Sunil, myself, and also a Agile networking table if you just want to sit down and see if you can meet more people. And there's a special drawing. I think Kenna mentioned that earlier. Thank you, Kenna, for doing that. That there's a drawing to win our favorite liquor of choice. We'll talk about what that is in just a second. It's a special edition that we will have. And I always want to address the elephant in the room. Yes, slides will be available to attendees after the session. We have a ton of slides, a ton of great, some of probably the best content you've ever had at any Define event webinar. We have that today with the slides that Sunil and his team put together. Some great, great stuff. But that will be available for survey participants. So if you go ahead and complete the survey, which you'll be getting via SurveyMonkey, after this call, you'll be entering into a drawing to win a Define Solutions Yeti mug, and also you get the slides. We also love to put out our poll. So I'm going to put a poll out here real quickly so you can see, just what you want to see on the right-hand corner. What is your favorite operating system? What is your favorite operating system for cell phone? Go ahead and take a second, see what people like, and then we'll go from there. I'm going to share that live, and maybe we'll share the results afterwards. Without further ado, we're going to go into our next session. I'm going to try and do a little bit to set the stage, a little bit about what makes this particular category so important. Well, as you'll see from our surveys that we sent out before, we ask a question of all our participants, which are, what do you want to see more of? What kind of events, what kind of topics do you are interested in? Everything from sourcing, the cost savings, to AI and technology, IC compliance, on marketplaces, managing statement of work, open innovations, less crowdsourcing. But overwhelmingly, the one thing that consistently across the dozen or so events that we've held in the last year or two, the one thing that's been consistent is people have been interested in building a talent strategy. And the one thing that I find really intriguing about building a talent strategy is that given the fact that everyone on their phone is really dedicated to redefining the future of work, there's something wrong in the way that most of the thought leadership in our industry or in the world really think about talent strategy. What is wrong with this picture? We look at the talent strategy from blue chip names in our space, like Indeed, the Academy to Innovate HR, and of course, Sherm. The one thing that they focus their talent strategy on is what? The employee experience. And while that's entirely relevant, and while that is certainly something that is worthy to know, uh, it's missing half the picture. And so when we start to talk a little bit about what the talent strategy of the future is, what the most effective way to look at it is, I always try to use this particular metaphor. The metaphor of the pond, talent strategy currently is pond or lake or whatever versus river. The legacy talent strategy is more about building a pond and finding ways to stock that pond with the right sort of fish and resources and everything you need to do to make sure that that pond is healthy and stocked with the appropriate amount of fish. So the effect when you decide to go catch something, it's in there. And all of the strategies are about maximizing the experience of that centralized talent pool. The future is really dedicated towards more of like a talent river, the ability to access on demand the knowledge as you need it and when it's available. You dip your lines in. And so the future strategy is more about managing that river and having access to that river in as many ways as possible, as many lines in the water as possible. So we have what we call the defiant talent strategy, which is, let's go ahead and read it. The successful talent strategy is defined by the deep understanding of how human capital in all of its forms, and that's important, increases institutional and shareholder value by creating a unique competitive advantage that improves customer experience and business outcomes. Therefore, it must include the strategic consideration and incorporation of multiple technologies, talent sources, talent engagement types, and also be without boundaries. And that to me is the very definition of what it's going to take for companies to be successful. So what now? So this is where we get to our main event. We're going to bring to the stage and explain the exponential talent strategy. My good friend Sunil, I'm going to go ahead and show you on stage right now. Sunil Bajaj, as you can see on the screen right there on the left I'm going to go ahead and skip his LinkedIn profile. You can scan that little code to get to his LinkedIn profile if you want to learn more about this businessman / philosopher. And we're going to go from there. I'm going to close the poll. It looks like everybody's split evenly, by the way, 50% iOS, 50% Android, which is not surprising. Neil, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
First, Brian, I think we have some new things to do a cheers about.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. I forgot to do that. One of the things that we decided to do is do things a little different here at Defiant Solutions at our events. Is we're going to go ahead and toast everyone's success. So here's to you, Sunil. Thanks so much. I drink Casa Maestri, which is a tequila brand that is a good friend of mine, Freddie Black, is a partner on. And who are you drinking, Sunil?
I have the Balvenie 16-year French oak Scotch single malt. It's one of my favorite brands, and excited to smell this.
Sure.
It smells really, really nice.
And for those of you who stick around for the roundtable session at the end, we're going to go ahead and make that available to everybody.
So yeah, it's a fun way to start a webinar, right?
First of its kind. So while you're calling up your slides, I'm going to go ahead and publish the new poll that we have about what's the greatest talent challenge, and take it away from you.
You got it. Brian, tell me when you can see this.
I can see it. There you go.
Excellent. So first of all, thank you very much for hosting, Brian. It's known you for a number of years now, and it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. And just your wisdom, your way of seeing the world is really meaningful for me, and I think that's one of the reasons we have some really great synergy together. So appreciate you hosting. We're excited today to bring this topic to the folks that are here, and thank you for spending time with us today. But the topic is developing your talent strategy with Prosperix Xponential. And we spent a lot of time thinking about the space, about what it looks like today, what it's going to look like in the future, how it's evolving, how it's changing, how the world is changing and what type of solutions we need to meet that change as it evolves. And so we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to talk about what the challenges are, what the design principle should be in terms of thinking about new strategy for talent in the ever evolving ecosystem, and we'll also delve a little bit into Prosperix Exponential as well. It's a new brand. We're excited to unveil it and just talk more about it. But it's been several years in the making. So while it's brand new and fresh, it's taken us a long time, and I'm very proud of our team for the work they've done in the background to bring this to life. So with that, let's get started. So Brian, you've spent a lot of time at SIA, at other organizations where you've seen this workforce program maturity model. I'd love to get your thoughts specifically about why is it that companies, businesses are not able to get to level 5 best in class in terms of their workforce program maturity.
Well, there's a couple of reasons, and I think thank you for the kind word. Actually, back at you. I think there's a couple of reasons why we see very few companies ever reaching level 5 in any real manner. One is they just aren't ready for it, or they just don't want. I think that's something to remember. There's a lot of organizations who good is just good enough, and as opposed to many of us, um, we're not necessarily satisfied with that. When we created the maturity model, the key challenge we were trying to do was to create a roadmap where people can aspire to over time. And the limitations of them really achieving that level 5, where contingent work is a competitive differentiator, have been a barrier from lack of technical sophistication, lack of institutional desire or awareness of the benefit for it. And then I think also a number of companies are really stuck in really traditional sort of perspectives on what contingent work is. It never ceases to surprise me about how many contingent workforce programs are just really limited to some old supply chain technologies or supply chain approaches that we were doing back in 1998, back when I was in high school. So I think the one thing that we see with the professionalization of contingent work is that drive towards to create that level 5 program is really picking up steam. And now, with a multitude of ways in which the gig economy and the future of work has been on the front of everyone's mind, I think we're going to see more companies striving to hit that next level of optimization.
Yep. And I'll echo that. And you know, what I'll say about this model, I think it's a really good framework to just measure where a company is, right? But it's really hard. In fact, it's very complex, and complexity is the big reason why it's so hard. You're trying to manage and balance so many competing areas of focus. So, for example, one area is I want to bring in new talent. Another area is cost savings. Another area is compliance. Another area is real-time visibility and insights. So there's so many competing areas, and I'm just scratching the surface there, right? And that it becomes really challenging in a complex environment to find a way to help solve all of them in tandem so that you can become best in class over a period of time, right? And so with that, I want to start with this, which is we spend a lot of time with clients and asking them questions about what their most troubling contingent workforce challenges are. And this is the list. It's a top 10 list of their biggest challenges that they're facing. And some of these are the underlying reasons for why these programs are not able to get to best in class. So the list probably is not surprising. The number one thing is talent shortages, which has been a pretty acute problem over the last few years. High costs, lack of visibility, reporting insights, hiring effectiveness. So the ability to get talent in the door at speeds for niche skills, additional geographies, so that they can scale up very effectively. Um, they also find that clients are saying that they have a lot of administrative burdens, whether it's contracts, whether it's just the onboarding processes, a lot of compliance risk as well. Oftentimes, they don't even know if a worker is on a 1099 or not, and whether they should perhaps even be qualified as a 1099. In addition to that, there's concern about inadequate supplier onboarding and performance management. So how quickly can you get suppliers in the door, and how easily can you manage their performance to ensure that they're being productive and able to support a program? On top of that, no rate benchmarking, standardization, complex approvals on budgeting and spend management processes. And then finally, there's two things that I think people don't think about as much. One of them is that oftentimes a program is very slow to adopt. So that means managers are not willing to join the program to be able to hire and standardize it. And then the biggest issue, in my opinion, is the poor candidate experience. Candidates are left kind of at the end as a problem to solve. And so these are the things that we're told by our clients that are probably the most troubling in most programs. Ryan, are you seeing something similar in your side as well?
I think that sounds about right. I think the one thing that I really appreciate about this list is the poor candidate experience. So if nothing has been proven over the last couple of years, programs live and die by that. And so often, back when we were first deploying these things, it was all about control and risk management. And those programs that are really tightly controlled with really tight cost and risk mitigation things to be incorporated, really didn't focus on candidate experience. And then that translates to slow growth and lack of program expansion and adoption over time. So
Yep.
I completely agree with this.
And so when we look at the previous slide where it talked about the workforce maturity model, these are a number of the reasons why businesses are not able to become best in class from a program perspective, right?
Hmm.
But what's interesting and surprising is that there's a number of justifiable reasons, right? So when you actually look at it, well, what's causing all this? Well, there's good reasons, right? So there's some common business reasons. For example, a business may acquire a new business unit, so they need to scale up. The company has a new diversity initiative and they need to add more suppliers. Company has record growth year, so they need to hire hundreds of new people. The company has seasonal demands, require additional support for volume, hiring ramps. So these are really common business reasons why there's a lot of strain on the workforce program. And then on top of that, there's functional reasons as well. A manager may say, "Hey, we want to build out our team, and we want to work with suppliers that we have a trusted relationship with." Or, and this is an interesting one, the best recruiters just left a top performing supplier, which means that that supplier is no longer able to meet your business needs. Or a supplier's reached out to managers saying, "Hey, I got a great candidate." And that manager likes and wants to hire that candidate ASAP, which means you have to bring in that new supplier into the system or ecosystem. And then finally, a manager has been unsuccessful in filling positions with existing suppliers and needs better supplier support. So all these are justifiable reasons why the program is constantly being pressured and strained and is not able to become best in class and perhaps meet the needs of an ongoing and evolving workforce.
I think that's a really good point. That second point about the recruiter, the best recruiter is left, or that recruiter is left a given company for to greet their pastors. Many people don't necessarily realize what a failure point that recruiter relationship is with many suppliers. The entirety of your program or agency success can be dedicated or kind of related back to that one individual in many situations. And if that individual's gone, the relationship is going to suffer. And then therefore, if you rely on them, the program is going to suffer overall.
What's fascinating, Brian, is I spend a lot of time thinking about what are the underlying reasons and root cause, right? And while these business reasons, functional reasons do add pressure, they're still not the root cause.
Hmm.
And the root cause actually surprisingly is what we call exponential change. And that's what we're going to delve deep into right now is what does that mean? Like, how does that even affect businesses? And I'm sure you're probably curious too to, why exponential change? Like, what's that have anything to do with what we're talking about today? Um, it's actually fundamental. And if you start understanding how exponential change is affecting businesses, the workforce solutions, you'll start to realize that you have to think differently and you can't continue to do things the same way. If you do things the same way, you're going to get the same results. It leads to insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, right? So you got to do stuff differently. And that's really what we want to hone in on today is what that root cause is and why it affects this workforce environment. Sound like a plan?
Let's get into it.
All right. So first, let's talk about what is linear versus exponential change, right? Most people are wired to think linearly. So they think in terms of, hey, things are going to progress in a certain direction, right? And incrementally, not exponentially. And what that means is if you start thinking in terms of numbers, if I start to count from 1 to 30, I go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it's a linear way of growing the numbers, right? But exponential is different. And our brains don't think exponentially, but exponential really is about doubling. And it means that every moment you're doubling. So early on, you can't even, it's deceptive. You can't even tell that something is actually changing. It seems linear because you're going from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8. But if you go 30 steps out, you're getting to a billion. That's the fundamental difference of exponential. And where did that come from? Why does that matter to us? It's because computing is accelerating technology, right? And in computing, things have doubled literally every year for the last 20 years. So it's what's called Moore's Law. Price performance doubles every 18 to 24 months. And that's been true across all of technology. So whether it's motherboards, whether it's memory, whether it's storage, what's compute power, all of these things have been doubling in terms of performance and the capability and technology and density over every 2 years. And what does that do? Well, it's nice that it's happening in computers, that exponential growth, but it's also affecting every part of our lives. So exponential innovation is occurring in every industry, and that's because technology is the catalyst. So you're seeing growth in the finance industry, automotive industry, in terms of automotive, autonomous driving, electric vehicles, life sciences, where they have breakthroughs on new gene therapies and a variety of things, and a number of other industries as well. So that's what's cool is that technology is driving an exponential innovation curve, and you're starting to see that because the world is truly a better place today. So you have less poverty, you have better literacy, you have more democracy, you have vaccination, you have child mortality that's gone down. So all these things of the last 50 to 100 years have improved significantly. And yet, the exponential breakthroughs continue to happen every single day. You're going to start seeing more and more of this in the next 5, 10, 20 years, where there's going to be a huge innovation curve in terms of our world having new innovations that just move it further forward and civilization continues to progress. Now, that's the rosy picture.
Yeah.
That's the positive picture.
And it's hard to be aware of the rosy picture nowadays. Seems like there's so much uncertainty, and it's hard to lose sight of that.
Okay, so
I don't know.
so with everything, there's two sides of coin, right? The rosy picture is true, and at the same time, there's such a vast amount of unpredictability in the markets as well, right? So you're seeing a lot of global events, whether it's wars, whether it's viruses, whether it's climate change, whether it's energy crisis, whether it's inflation and federal bank policies to fight it, quantitative easing. I mean, these things are radically, shifting our daily worldview every single moment, right? And so you got to take the fact that it's positive is great, but there's a whole bunch of uncertainty as well. And that's the key. We're going to start delving a little bit deeper into that because I want to point out one thing. So I don't know if you've heard of this or not. It's called VIX. Only folks that typically trade stocks and are into the market, stock markets understand this, but VIX is fascinating. It's the volatility index. It's also called the fear index. And they've been tracking this for a good, 12, 15 years now. And what's interesting about VIX is whenever there's a lot of uncertainty and or fear in the markets, the VIX index spikes, right? Now you see the biggest spike we had was right at the pandemic, right? That was the biggest spike we've had in a long time. But what's fascinating is the number of large spikes have increased since the pandemic. And more importantly, the frequency in which they happen. So they're happening more often and they're much more volatile. And the stock market is a reflection of our macroeconomic environment and macro lives, right? Everything that's going on in the world. And so what you have to understand is volatility is increasing, which means the fear is increasing. And so what you'll notice is, and this is the key thing, exponential change leads to exponential volatility, which has the potential to create exponential chaos, right? And in that environment, it is absolutely difficult to, you know, manage that change. That environment, the pace of change, the change itself, it's unforeseen, it's unpredictable, it's unplanned and unmanageable, right? And that is a big message. If you get nothing else today, this is a big message, is you have to realize that this is the new world. This is the new norm. Is that not only do you have a lot of positive, rosy, amazing things that have a huge potential to, create great impact on positive impact for us, we also have a lot of volatility and potential for chaos simultaneously. And being able to really manage that, being able to predict it and see it and plan for it, that's going to be key in the new world.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think one thing to remember is that a lot of the traditional supplier management and talent strategies that we've been dealing with and enforcing now are based on assumptions that just have a different worldview, a different time frame. Not nearly as many tools are available, not nearly as much chaos in the system, and not nearly as much volatility, to your point. And so I think that's revealing a lot of the challenges as these organizations continue to struggle to have adoption. I can't think of more than a handful of companies of the hundreds, if not thousands, I've talked to, where these challenges can be found in just some basic root cause philosophies that have gotten in the way of really innovating and growing.
And you hit on a really good point, right? When you have designed and architected and developed your solutions 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, they were built for a previous normal. But the new normal, they just don't conform to. They're not able to adapt to, right? And you need a different way of thinking and a different design architecture really to help you meet that new normal, right? And so that's where we are. And what we find is that exponential volatility and chaos wreak havoc on businesses and the workforce. And it makes the workforce challenges even worse, solving them nearly impossible. The pace of change strains legacy systems in a way that they either break down or they don't function effectively. And our conclusion is exponential challenges require exponential solutions, right? And you have to design differently. You have to think differently. And I'm just going to leave that as a seed that it's planted in your mind for a moment, right? And then shift gears a little bit to kind of go deeper into an example of a particular customer case and in use case in which we can show how this kind of transpires and the exponential chaos and the volatility and the issues transpire in an environment. Is that cool, Brian?
That's totally cool. Let's do this.
All right. So we're going to talk about supplier management specifically. It's just one of the pillars that clients want to typically solve for, but you'll see how, if you solve for this one area, there's like 10 others, right? So it's just one example, but we're going to go deeper here, right? Just to give you a flavor, right? So most businesses onboard suppliers when they need help, and they need help typically when they're trying to add, support for a new geography, some skills that they cannot fulfill, or they're not able to fulfill with existing suppliers they have. But onboarding them requires additional contractual burdens, legal costs, management overhead, with no guarantee that the supplier is actually going to be successful. And that's the odd part. Is like you're doing this blindly. You're adding suppliers, but you have no clue whether they're going to really perform or not, right? And so that's been the prior normal, right? And what you also find is that even after the suppliers are onboarded, it can take weeks or months before they add value, which means that the manager that really needs to benefit from them being added has to wait a long time, right? And it leads to frustration because they're waiting for their jobs to be fulfilled. And so that is a big issue that continues to happen even after suppliers are onboarded. Most businesses have no clue whether their new suppliers are the best ones or not. They usually don't know because the performance management happens a quarter later. And they get quarterly scorecard results, right? It's too long of a period of time before they have any clue whether or not the suppliers are good, whether their rates are in alignment with the current program rates, whether, they're actually gonna have an impact. And so these are some of the underlying challenges. And so from our experience, and we've done the impact analysis behind the scenes, it's fascinating to see what the business ends up doing, right? They find a way to cope. And what that means is the manager, while they're waiting for suppliers to have an impact, the hiring teams often resort to using sub vendors, 1099 contractors, or candidates on work visas to fill the gap because they still need talent in the door today, right? Their projects are suffering and they're waiting and they can't meet their milestones and goals and business objectives, right? And so what we find is that by this problem, just one area, it essentially becomes a precursor to what we call rogue spend. And rogue spend is when you're bringing in suppliers and essentially they're not, you know, uh, they're costing more and or they're creating compliance risk and or they're not standardized with contractual terms. And so the business is finding alternative paths for hiring other than the standardized process, right? And so it's also a big reason why contingent staffing gets creatively masked under SOWs that are meant for deliverable-based projects. So which undermines the proper spend tracking and increases cost long term. So it becomes what we call a leaky bucket, right? So
Yeah,
you're leaking from the contingent staffing into the SOW, which means the program's really not getting adopted, right?
yeah, yeah. The
So
traditional supply chain really focuses on consolidation of supply base and towards some sort of nebulous optimal ratio, which is very, very difficult to, find out what that is. I had a call just today with an enterprise buyer in the UK who talked about the only thing they really, whenever they would get the quarterly scorecards, they knew they were irrelevant as soon as they saw them, without really looking at the major inputs, which are the end customers happy? Is the program growing? As the primary determinant. That's the scorecard that they reference.
yep. And here's what we are also learning, right? What this inevitably leads to is a downward spiral of higher costs, uncontrollable spread of suppliers, non-standard contract terms, compliance risks, constant change management, and the worst part is a program that never gets fully adopted or matured, right? And the thing is this, if your aim is to build a best-in-class program, it means you need everybody's alignment and buy-in that the program's gonna get adopted and utilized. Well, guess what? If the biggest stakeholder of the program are the managers, if their needs are not getting met, they're not gonna adopt the program. They're gonna find creative ways around the program, and so are suppliers, right?
Yeah.
And that's what ends up happening. And so this is a big issue, and what happens often is most business stakeholders just give up or they find a permanent alternative solution to their hiring needs. It's human nature to take the path of least resistance or the easy way out, right? And so that's the psychological aspect to it. And what we find is that it becomes impossible for for the program to become best in class, and that's really the root cause of what that we're trying to solve for, right? How do we get to a point where it's built so not only everybody gets to use it, but they enjoy using it and they want to continue to use it so that you can evolve it to become best in class over a period of time, rather than staying in a zone of inefficiency and stagnance. So that's key is the program can't just stay static. It has to continue to evolve in a meaningful way. So what we ask is it a crisis or opportunity, right? And from our perspective, anytime there's something, massive change happening, chaos, and things that are not going well, we see it as an opportunity. It can turn into a crisis if you're not prepared, though, right? And so this is an opportunity where we feel we're really well positioned, given our innovative capability set, to be able to solve this for a lot of our clients. So that's where we're going to start again, reminding you again, exponential challenges require exponential solutions and a different way of thinking, right? So with that, we'll probably start leading into the Prosperix Exponential offering. Before that, Brian, I just want to pause for a moment. Anything you want to bring up before we jump into that?
I really like this kind of challenging the notion of traditional supplier management for sure. I think that we've been using some of those same metrics around consolidation of spend and consolidation of opportunity for decades now, and I think that while it served us well when cost control and the Wild West was ruling major enterprises nowadays. It seems like that time is really kind of showing its length in the teeth, and we're really seeing that with the rise of, like I mentioned before, a lot of these newer engagement modes. So the willingness to kind of rethink what it is to incorporate a talent strategy and how you leverage your third parties, regardless of their form, into that strategy, I think is really an exciting development. And we've always kind of wondered how, human capital and human, HR is going to become a strategic partner. I think now is the time where we're going to see HR become, part of those more strategic function within many organizations as talent becomes a much scarcer commodity and one that has a wider pool of access. As you're looking to, the rise of remote work affected not just employees, but also the way companies choose to engage labor in all of its forms. So the future program is omni-channel, omni-regional, and global in its perspective on how they engage people. And I think that the traditional notion of consolidating your supply base to five primary suppliers is just it's not going to work.
It's an old and outdated way of thinking, right, Brian? At the end of the day, let's think about Uber and how it designs its solution, right? When you needed a cab in the past, you just called a cab driver or the cab agency. They'd bring a cab to you. It's a very what you call simple solution. That's perfect for the slide that I just am sharing, right? Simple solutions are designed to solve a single problem, right? Complex systems are it's like this. If you think about it, I know how the key of my car needs to go into the key to the car, and I can turn it on and it works. That's a simple solution, right? Using a key to start a car. A complicated solution, which is different than complex, is the
Mm.
car itself. The car is complicated. I don't have to know how the engine works, how, electric driving or even the autonomous driving works in the car. That's a complicated system. A complex system is when I take my car into the road, what about all the things around me, like the traffic, like the bike lane, like uh, pedestrians that are walking? Being able to understand that environment, that ecosystem in which that car has to travel, that's a complex environment. That's a complex system. Complex systems are heterogeneous, they're nonlinear, they're stochastic, they're dynamic, interdependent. Sorry, that should say interdependent there. There's a feedback loop that's there. They're adaptive and self-organizing, and then there's an emergence to them. And most systems, what I'll say from a workforce solution perspective today, are designed to be simple systems. They're not designed to handle a complex system environment. And that's where really where, if you look at the underlying architecture, it's a big difference in between how, an Uber, somebody trying to bring in a car just to go and get a cab ride versus Uber basically looking at all types of people that can provide ride sharing, being able to analyze globally the data, then apply it locally so that you get the right price, matching, you get the right driver at the right place at the right time, all of that, and payment through a credit card just is really the design for a complex system, right? It's a big difference between a cab service of yesterday versus a Uber of today. With that, I want to unveil some of the new talent strategy design principles, right?
Mm.
And so if you're thinking about a talent strategy, what do you have to think for to make it exponential, right? And to design for an ever-changing system and environment. So, for example, agility. I think that's a word that's been utilized a lot lately. You have to be agile, and you have to be flexible. Well, what does that mean? It means that you're able to adapt to anything that happens. The workforce there may be a shortage of the workforce, and you need to adapt so you can scale it fast in that environment. Well, guess what? Nowadays, we're starting to face the opposite, which may because some of the workforces are going down. How do you adapt? The agile aspects are super important. There's another one, which is resilience and anti-fragility, which means that it doesn't fall apart when things get complex or complicated, right? And so what that means is that it's able to sustain and be resilient in times of high change, right? Another is network effects, where you're not just trying to access one pool of talent, one pool of suppliers, but really looking at talent across an ecosystem and get what's called network effects. So the best supplier for you may not even be in your local vicinity, may not even be in your country, maybe outside, but they're able to find the right people because they have the access to the right talent pool locally. And so they're able to give you the network effects. How do you tie into that large network? Automation. How do you simplify and automate? And how do you get to a point where things are adapting as you work, right? The workflow, the information is able to guide the business, the users, as well as the systems to continue to, function at an optimal way. What that requires is real-time data and insights. And not just to be able to give you nice fancy reports, but to utilize that data and insights to drive a lot of the automation, derive a lot of the AI and ML and thinking and algorithms to help you build a more effective workforce system. Another key design principle is diversity and transparency, which means you have access to visibility and insights across the entire workforce at all times. And then the last two for me are important, which are alignment to outcomes. So outcomes is not just business outcomes, but what about the workforce outcomes? What about the individual outcomes? How about aligning to the individual outcomes so that essentially you can map prosperity across the individual, the workforce, and the business? If you're able to do that effectively, then everybody wins. And then finally, seeing it all as an ecosystem, which means suppliers are important, which means that talent pools are important, which means that individuals that are in the workforce are important, as well as the business, right? And the needs of all must be balanced and harmonized,
Yeah.
and that's really key. So these are the fundamental, in my opinion, design principles from which you can build an exponential talent strategy.
And that notion of data and insight, I think, is really overused. I mean, just simply having information is very different than insight and wisdom. And looking at and understanding what the data means and having a process to make a decision or apply that, apply those decisions or look at that data to change behavior is really critical. I always kind of use the metaphor of the data versus wisdom. And, the data is a number, wisdom is what to do with it and what it means. And that comes from experience and really thinking things holistically and strategically as opposed to the vacuum. So I think this is a great slide.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example of that, Brian. So in the way we've designed our, Prosperix VMS network and the exponential components. So not only do we have real-time data visibility and insights, so every supplier, there's a real-time scorecard on how they're performing, right? But we use that data and to guide our algorithms. The algorithms actually see who are the best suppliers, but not just across the ecosystem, but for every job. So for every job, dynamically, it's able to see the profile of the supplier, the performance of the supplier, the pools of talent that they represent, the bandwidth that they currently have in terms of their workload, and map all of that information together to figure out, hey, which suppliers are going to be the most able to support this one requirement at this in real time, right? That insight helps automated decision, right? And so that's far different and leads to a dynamic, ever-changing environment. We can support that versus a static environment that requires tiering and old ways of thinking, so which doesn't change until a quarter or two later when you have the data, right? It's very different.
And then another thing I want to ask a question on is this alignment to outcome. So often people think about filling a role as a discrete entity without a deep understanding of how that particular job contributes to a business outcome. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how would you recommend, give me an example of what that would look like.
So alignment to outcomes from our perspective is having the workers' needs in mind, right? And there's several ways to facilitate that, but I can tell you there's a couple of companies we've been working with that are taking that next step. And so for their workforce program, I'll give you an example. They're coming up with new benefits models, right, for the workforce that are far above and beyond the minimums that are required by, let's say, ACA and other things. They're looking at how do we make holiday pay and sick pay a default rather than a kind of an optional thing from suppliers. And so that enrichment is an example of making sure the workforce is taken care of, right? But beyond that, there are other aspect, which is aligning that worker's career trajectory to the needs of the organization. And the needs of the organization, for example, today there may be a position in which the worker is suited really well for a contingent role, but sometime later may evolve to a different type of role. And being able to map to all of those options and available opportunities is going to be very key, right? And so that's really where basically the fit and the interest and the excitement of the workforce with the business's needs, that alignment is what matters.
Fantastic.
So with that, I'm going to jump into Prosperix Exponential, and really what we're aiming for with this new launch is to help businesses unlock extraordinary workforce capabilities, right? And we're seeing this in action with some of the clients that we've been installed in already. And it's just a taste of things to come. We're very excited about it. There's several aspects to it. One is the technology and the services component, but then there's a very meaningful workforce experience component that we'll share with you towards the end as well. So to start, why we chose Exponential as a name for this brand is because we've thought a lot about the ever-changing environment and designing a solution for that. So the underlying architecture is designed to help businesses 10x their capabilities. And the capabilities are areas such as scalability, right? So extraordinary scale through network effects, unlimited talent pools, and an expansive network of suppliers. 10x performance, so real-time data insights, algorithms-driven performance, and measurable outcomes. 10x experience, so extraordinary experience for hiring teams, the candidates, suppliers. So when they get into the system, it's intuitive, it's easy, it's understandable, it feels natural, right? Automation, so simplifying tasks so they become automatic. Why should you have to spend a lot of time doing supplier management? Why can't it be automated so that it's less troublesome, less burdensome? How about the exponential or 10x insights, so visibility, transparency, intelligence to help you make more informed decisions in real time? It's tremendous cost savings through by increasing competition, but also leveraging automation and improving adoption and utilization of the workforce programs that exist, rather than having a leaky bucket that forces people to go outside of the program. 10x compliance, impact. Impact is very interesting because some of our clients were surprised because we were able to set them up and go live literally the same day. That means that their ability to realize impact and value was immediate. And that's important, especially in current world where you don't need months and months to plan and set up a workforce environment. 10x innovation, so modern technology. We're proud of the fact that we filed patents this year, specifically around our VMS network capability and some of the underlying technology and architecture around that. It's a game changer. And that innovation is really what's going to be paramount for the future of work. And then finally, 10x prosperity, which means a win-win ecosystem that aligns incentives and outcomes for all stakeholders. So these are the underlying design principles, components that are essentially the key ingredients for Prosperix Exponential. So with that, I'll go into some of the solution components as well. Any questions, Brian? Thoughts?
I think that's great. I think this is exciting.
Awesome. One of the areas that I wanted to spend a little bit of time is just helping people understand and realize the difference between a standard VMS and the Prosperix VMS network. When you look at a standard VMS, remember they're designed and architected for simple systems, the old normal, not the new normal, which is chaotic, constantly changing. Uh, it's it's a whole different world we're living in today. But a standard VMS, you publish your job, you have access to your suppliers, you have access to your talent pools, your reports, etc. And the data to drive all those decisions are within that silo. It's within that one box, right? With the VMS network, when we designed this, we designed it to be an open system, a shared system, and constantly evolving system in the respect that when a client is deployed, they're deployed as a node in the network. And what that means is they become part of an ecosystem. And so not only do they get to publish their jobs and see their suppliers, their talent pools, but they also get access to a network of suppliers and a network of talent pools and data that maps talent across the entire ecosystem to help them find the best talent in fastest speeds possible in multiple geographies and so on. So that's the difference between a network approach versus a standard siloed approach. What you'll find in the VMS network is we're the first and only solution that has a built-in and fully integrated hiring marketplace. What that means is that you're able to fulfill positions faster with a large network of suppliers that's completely built in. And so what does that look like? It means that you can leverage your existing incumbent suppliers, you can manage them, but you can access an unlimited pool of suppliers as well. One contract, one invoice, one point of contact to handle all supplier relationship, but you can reach thousands of motivated suppliers in real time, and then algorithms will help drive the interaction between you and all the suppliers. What it also means, and this is key, is that we are changing the mix of suppliers that businesses have access to. So traditionally, most businesses consolidate down to 10, 20, 30 suppliers, and they're usually the large names that you've always heard about. Now, in our case, we have those national suppliers. You also get niche suppliers, boutique suppliers. But my favorite part is that you get international suppliers and even independent recruiters and RPOs. We have currently 2,600 suppliers. When a position is published, it goes in real time to the incumbent suppliers as well as the network of suppliers, and we create a open environment in which all suppliers can compete to fill positions in real time, right? And so it works really well. We're finding our clients are benefiting tremendously, right? Where they're getting tremendous outcomes. And I'll share that with you as well in a moment. Before that, just a little deep dive. I mentioned a moment ago that we're the only network VMX with a built-in hiring marketplace. Other capabilities that are unique to us are automated supplier management, which means no longer having to do all the burdensome onboarding of suppliers. It's simple. Suppliers can get onboarded and go live literally in minutes. Real-time reporting and analytics, flexible workflows, intelligent algorithms, industry-first digital right to represent, which is completely unique. It also gets rid of this question about who's representing that candidate and fighting between different suppliers about, hey, that was mine, etc. Ownership, which there is no real ownership in today's world, and yet, just the representation questions get answered. Duplicate submissions get answered as well. And then finally, the candidate-centric experience, which is key. We've actually moved the candidate's experience into our vendor management system. So candidates get a login from day one, not after they're hired, not just to fill in timesheets, okay? Because that's way late in the process, but really at moment one when they're applying for the job so they can actually see their progress through the entire life cycle, right? So those capabilities are important from a candidate-centric experience. And then there's other aspects such as applicant tracking, candidate pre-screening in smart forms, and unified communication collaboration, which again, a number of VMSs still have not been able to adopt, and the VMS technology that we built has from day one.
So, but the digital right to represent, basically what that means is, given that we're dealing with so many suppliers who may be sourcing from the same candidate pool, we don't know. The digital represent allows that particular client or that's the candidate to decide which agency they want to represent them. Is that the
You
application?
got it.
Okay.
You got it. It puts that control in the hands of the candidate, right? They may be reached out to by a dozen agencies and recruiters, and honestly, may the best win, right? But the candidate gets to opt in and choose not only who represents them, what talent pools they want to be part of, what businesses they want their profile to be represented to, etc. Right? It gives them that power and control to control their own destiny.
We have a question, I think, from the audience, which goes back to the fact that we have such a wide network, or we have such a wide network of 2,600 suppliers or so. How would a supplier in the U.S. compete with a supplier in a third world country via cost and living differences? So, is it a competitive marketplace, or the low cost providers usually the ones who win the day?
No, yes. Let's just peel back what that means, really, right? So Our aim was always to provide democratized access. That means that if a supplier is capable of supporting US positions with US candidates, but perhaps just does not, and it doesn't even have to be foreign. It doesn't have to be outside of the US. But I'll give you an example. There are some suppliers that are really regional. They're really good at Texas, as an example, and they're good at finding oil or engineering resources in Texas. Well, guess what? That same capability may apply across all states within the US, but they're just not registered to provide business there or provide talent there. So how do they do that? Well, our capabilities, we enable that, right? We enable that not just for the niche and local and boutique suppliers, but also for the international. It all is about the capability set and democratized access. So this any supplier can provide capabilities and talent pools if they have the ability to do so, right?
Yeah.
And yes, there is a cost of living difference, but it just means that we're making it such that anybody and everybody can get a fair share, right? That's really what it's all about.
Thank you, Rebecca Medina from Talent Cheetah for that question.
Absolutely.
Very on.
And what we're finding is our clients are achieving extraordinary hiring outcomes. There's been tens of thousands of jobs added by our clients, and as I mentioned, we have over 2,600 suppliers in our ecosystem. What we're This is the fun part. On average, for every job, we're getting about 16 candidates submitted for every job, right? By the suppliers. We then curate down to 7 candidates that are actually forwarded onto the client, out of which the clients are doing about 4 interviews per job, and there's a 100% fulfillment rate. And that's unique because a lot of times clients are not able to fulfill some of the niche positions, the hard to fill positions or certain geographies or certain issues. But when you have a large network that can supplement, you don't find that to be an issue. So the outcomes are pretty amazing, and it's been fun to see that kind of come to life. And I'm gonna kind of this is the final piece, which is the Prosperix Exponential. I've talked about the solution, the design principles, the capabilities, but really this is what I'm really excited about. I'll tell you, it's been a while in the making. What happened for a long time is we spent a lot of time as part of workforce programs, and what we realized is that some companies would call their workers the extended workers, the contingent workers, the flex workers, the you name it workers, right? Non-employee workforce. And honestly, all of that to me is not empowering. If I'm part of that workforce, I feel like I'm an important part. And I feel like I'm going to contribute to the business. I want to make an impact and I want to be empowered. And we found that that wasn't empowering. And so I wanted to change that. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what would be the right term, right? What's the right way to describe that? And that's where we thought about Prosperix Exponential. It's a suite of solutions, right? It does everything from MSP to VMS to hiring marketplace to payrolling. It's a full suite. So businesses that don't understand or don't want to have to manage the entire thing can really rely on Prosperix to help manage that entire process. But more than anything, it creates a world-class candidate experience and workforce experience. And so this is really what it's all about. We're creating a exponential workforce program. And so that X represents that individual, that workforce, right? And that X is key because they're an exponential worker, which means they have exponential capabilities, exponential potential, exponential, ability to create an impact. And that's really what this is all about. Is exponential is not just about the environment, the macroeconomics and what's changing, but it's about the workforce, right? And our aim is to create a fully branded, beautiful experience that's empowering for those individuals in that workforce. And that's kind of the example I wanted to share today.
Thank you, Sunil. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and while we are transitioning to our kind of our closing comments, want to make sure we hope everybody stays for the roundtable session afterwards. We got a lot of great stuff to discuss, and also you can win the chance to win our favorite scotch and/or tequila based on your particular response. So we want to thank you for that. We're going to stick around also for questions. We want to save those for the end and save that for the roundtable sessions. We hope you'll join us. If you want to learn more, There's my contact details and then Sunil's contact details. He's available for parties and birthday celebrations as well, to share some wisdom and insight. We certainly hope you're going to take a moment to complete a survey. We are religiously surveying a customer experience for our events to constantly try and get better at this. And as an added bonus, everybody who completes the survey is entered into a win for a drawing for a Yeti Defiant Solutions or Defiant Events and Education Yeti mug. I always say this, it's an opportunity to be the envy of all your friends and neighbors when they ask you where you got this incredibly amazing item that you can tell us there. You certainly hope you're going to join us for the roundtable session. I want to reinforce that point. And for everybody who attends the roundtable, we're going to track those people. They're going to be entered into a drawing to win either a tequila or a bottle of scotch. We certainly hope you'll also join us for our next event, which is going to be November 10th, sponsored by NTech, Building the Future Workforce Development for the Frontline Worker. And without further ado, I'm going to say thank you, and we'll see you all at the roundtable session. Thank you, Sunil, for this such amazing insight. This is a great presentation, a great solution, and thank you everyone for your participation. We'll see you in the roundtable.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you, Kenneth, for the support.